Hello, everyone. On behalf of Jio Institute, it is my honor to welcome you all to the webinar, Technology 4.0, Humanity 4.0, and the prospect of the post-COVID world. We are humbled to have received participation across age groups, sectors, designations from academia, industry, and government. Our participants today comprise 23 states and 3 union territories of India, as well as 20 countries around the world. Once again, a very warm welcome to you all. As we grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic that has redefined norms, it is essential to analyze its impact across geographies and sectors. While the onset of the fourth IR and new technologies continue to disrupt the way we work, interact, collaborate, live, and even exist, navigating this new normal is both challenging and replete with opportunities. From the rapid rise of online learning and as well as healthcare mechanisms to managing working from home, technology has come to our rescue and helped navigate this pandemic in innumerable ways. Conversely, it has also given rise to a more involved debate on data sharing, privacy, and other dimensions of emerging technologies. In such a scenario, our choice to understand, analyze, and use technology will be critical. Subjective issues such as compassion, dignity, ethics will assume importance in hitherto unforeseen ways. As we hopefully start contemplating a post-pandemic world, it is important to assess the role of technology in existing systems and in creating more efficient and effective ones. The webinar will explore this new normal from a technology, societal, and humanistic point of view. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Dr. Deepak Jain, who is the Vice Chancellor of Jio Institute, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Jain is the European President and Professor of Marketing at the China-Europe International Business School. His influential career spans nearly 3 decades as an educator, a senior business school administrator, and a consultant to corporations and governments. Among the many distinctions for his teaching and service, he has received the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman from the Prime Minister of India, an award that recognizes exceptional leadership contributions of overseas Indians. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm saying good morning because I am speaking from Chicago. Our distinguished speaker would be in the late evening in Singapore, but let me just welcome all of you and say good day. Very few people in life get an opportunity to create something from scratch. Jio Institute, a great vision of Mr. and Mrs. Ambani, is such an institute where I feel very honored and privileged to be a part of it in creating what I would describe a world-class educational institution. Today we have with us a speaker who has achieved all the honors and distinctions in the world. So I would keep my remarks very brief. But one great point about creating an institute like Jio is we have the blessings of many beautiful minds, one of them being the speaker today, Dr. Subra Suresh. I started my journey in this field in 1979. And I come from a very small town in Assam called Tejpur. And I just thought I will share a small perspective with you that what education can do to the world. November 1962, China attacked India, and they came from the northeastern part of India, an area that used to be called Nepha, Northeastern Frontier Agency. Today we call it Arunachal Pradesh. And when they crossed the mountain region, the first plain town was my birthplace called Tejpur. I remember that was my first year in kindergarten. The teacher came to the class and said the Chinese army is less than 50 kilometers from the school. The government of India has asked us to vacate the town by 7 p.m. We are trying to reach out to your parents to take you back home. In those days, the telephone connections, etc., were not that great. I remember my father came, took us home, and we left the town in the evening. In those days, there was no bridge on Brahmaputra, so we had to wait overnight. Next morning, cross the bridge by ferry, and then it took us 8 days to reach a town called Rohtak near Delhi, where my grandparents were living, and my grandfather was a school teacher. He taught for 49 years, 24 years as a teacher and 25 years as the headmaster of Jain High School in Rohtak. This is November 1962. I was a refugee of the Chinese War, leaving Tejpur, Assam to go to Rohtak. November 2017, almost the same week, that same refugee was announced as the president of China-Europe International Business School. And that's Deepak Jain. A war refugee would one day become the president of one of the top business schools in China. A person of Indian origin only highlights the role of education. I was blessed to get good education, good blessings from my parents, and also my teachers. I attribute my success to education and good parental guidance. And I wish this Jio Institute would be a source of educational excellence so that many people who may not have a chance or an opportunity to go abroad to study, we will bring those people to Jio. I remember growing up, we used to hear a statement from Swami Vivekananda that if students cannot come to you, you need to go where the students are. We have so many talented people in India, and our chairperson had this vision that why not we create a world-class institute in India where we can invite scholars from all over the world and they can share their knowledge, their wisdom with people here. I feel very blessed to be asked to be a part of this institute. Before this, in the mid-90s, Dean Jacobs, who was the Dean of Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, gave me the opportunity to head the Indian School of Business, which was started on July 1st, 2001. Indian School of Business has been a success story, building on the same principles that we create partnership with world-class institutions and give our students world-class education. Today, the talk combining technology 4.0 with humanity 4.0 and looking at post-COVID world is very timely. We just had a similar session for our students in Shanghai, which was, the talk was on artificial intelligence, machine learning for the modern enterprise. There were 5 sessions of 3 hours each, and the last session I spoke on human intelligence and human learning, because I really believe that with all the technological developments, humans still have a competitive edge. We have the ability to think deeper, and that's what I spoke on in terms of the power that lies within us and how, with all the help from technology, we can harness the power that lies inside us. To all the participants attending today's session, I can just rest assure you that with your help, your cooperation, and with the help of all the distinguished scholars, the best days of Jio are ahead of us. And again, to all the people from Jio, thank you for including me. And I always say one thing, that no challenge ahead of you is greater than the force behind you. To all the people in the people attending this day, Deepak Jain is always behind, and I can just speak on behalf of all the world-class scholars. They are all behind taking Jio to greater and greater heights. Enjoy the talk. And Dr. Subra Suresh, thank you for enlightening us with your presence. I remember meeting you in Singapore, and you are a source of inspiration to all of us with the distinctions that you had with being the head of the best technology institute, MIT, being the president. We all wish we can follow your footsteps inch by inch. And I'm sure that the new generation of Indians would look at it as a roadmap on their journey of education and leadership. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, sir. As always, your words are inspirational to all of us. We will now begin with our session for the day. I request all participants to keep submitting questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. In the interest of time, please keep them brief and relevant to the topic. With this, I'd now like to invite Dr. Subra Suresh to commence his session. Dr. Suresh is the 4th President and inaugural Distinguished University Professor at NTU, Singapore since January 2018. He is a globally recognized material scientist, biological engineer, author, and entrepreneur. Dr. Suresh has also served as the director of the US National Science Foundation, a position to which he was nominated by President Barack Obama and unanimously confirmed by the US Senate. He has authored 3 books, more than 300 research articles, 26 patent applications, and has co-founded 2 technology startups. So without further delay, we welcome you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sanjayan, and thank you, Professor Deepak Jain, for your very kind introduction. And I want to thank Jio Institute for inviting me to join all the participants today across the globe, across time differences, especially during a global pandemic. And that itself shows that technology has enabled us to connect in ways in which otherwise we would not have been able to connect. As for example, during the last 1918 great pandemic, when technology was not mature enough to the extent it is today. What I would like to do today, if we could share the first slide, please, the cover slide. I would like to walk you through some thoughts on developments in technology 4.0, intersection of technology with humanity and human behavior in particular, and especially in the context of the last 18 months where COVID has changed dramatically the way in which we live, work, think, and look at lives and livelihoods. The topic is very broad, and I don't claim to know quite a lot about this. And many of the things that I'm going to mention are not particularly new. So with that backdrop, hopefully I can raise a few questions for us to contemplate so that we can collectively look at a possible post-COVID world where some of these issues can be addressed so that we maximize the benefits of technology while minimizing any detrimental effects of technology. I would like to start with, in the next slide, just to walk you through how fast technology has evolved in a little more than 100 years. So I'm going to take one particular example of the adoption of technology, and specifically the time it took for different major technologies that have changed our day-to-day lives to go from inception to the first 50 million customers or users. So let's start with the telephone. It took the telephone 75 years to reach the first 50 million users across the globe. This is some data from a couple of years ago that was reported in Visual Capitalist and Wall Street Journal. If you take the automobile, it took 64 years for the car to reach a customer base of 50 million around the world. Electricity took 46 years. A credit card that we take for granted today for financial transactions, it took 28 years to reach the first 50 million users. Television took 22 years. The automatic teller machine in the bank where we get the money took 18 years to reach 50 million users. Computers took 50 million. Took 14 years to reach 50 million users. Mobile phones, 12 years. Internet, 7 years. Facebook, 4 years. WeChat, 1 year. Pokemon Go, 19 days. Of course, this graph is 2 to 3 years old. Other things have happened since that time, which have even further significantly accelerated the adoption by the first 50 million users. We know from last year, people who have never heard of entities like Zoom, through which we are connecting today, 50 million users is a small number for the Zoom user base across the globe today. So this gives us an idea of the ever accelerating pace of not only technology development, but equally the pace of adoption of technology across the globe beyond borders by the general population. It also speaks not only to the sophistication of technology and the global reach, it also speaks to the affordability of technology by a large global base in a relatively short period of time, which has only been accelerated because of COVID. Let's go to the next slide that specifically addresses the impact of COVID. So I'm going to start, there are many lessons learned from COVID. And of course, this is not a comprehensive list, but I'm going to highlight about 6 issues that I think about all the time in my day-to-day work. So I'm going to start at the top. As the previous slide showed, the accelerating pace of technology adoption, not only technology development and deployment, but adoption, and the ever accelerating pace of digitization. So Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, for example, said last year at the very beginning of COVID that many, many years of technology development and adoption have been compressed into just a few weeks because of COVID-19. And that is very much true. And this pace is only likely to accelerate, not only with Industry 4.0, but also with accelerating digitization, the rollout of things like 5G, in which Jio, the company, is one of the front runners in the adoption of digital tools across India, for example. So the second aspect, going clockwise from the top, the second aspect of COVID that has been globally felt is at a time when human beings could not travel last year, and we had to be confined to their cities, to their towns, and to their homes around the world in both developing and developed countries. Technology came to the rescue. When people could not meet, even family members could not meet face to face, entities like tools like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx, etc., came to the rescue in connecting people. Even though digital connection may not be exactly the same as face-to-face human connection, it at least partially made up for that gap. Another thing to note with respect to that is a unique thing that happened last year. From about March, April of last year, for a period of about 8 to 10 weeks or so, approximately 2 to 2.5 billion people around the world were involuntarily confined because of the spread of COVID to within their towns, within their homes, or within, in some cases, 1 or 2 rooms from which they had to live and work, sometimes with large families. And this has never happened before in human history. As one of the articles in the Scientific American noted last year, more than 25% of the world population being confined to restricted in their mobility never happened before in human history. The psychological implications of this and the effects of this are quite remarkable. And even the last time anything like this happened, close to this happened, during the 1918 global pandemic, the world population was not even 2.5 billion people. So with those experiments spreading across the world because of COVID-19, globalization through digital means was accelerated because of technology and the tools we had. At the same time, there were a lot of factors pushing us in the anti-globalization direction. For example, geopolitics, even before COVID, led to local and parochial views dominating over global views, both in some developed countries and in some developing countries. On top of it, COVID led to the closure of borders, restrictions on travel, almost no flights going from any place to any other place on a large scale. This lack of mobility put a big tension with respect to one trend that was accelerating globalization and the completely opposite trend of reverse globalization or parochialization. And the aftermath of these two effects, once someday when COVID is over, it will be interesting to watch what the steady state is going to be and how long does it take for us to go back to an accelerating globalization trend and in what form. On top of this, we have polarization of technological dominance across the world, and what implications will that have in the post-COVID world is an interesting point to ponder. Then going further on the clock in the clockwise direction, my third point is COVID has exposed a whole range of inequalities, both among countries and equally among peoples in the same countries. For example, take vaccination as an example. Developed countries have been able to gain much more access to vaccination than developing countries. There is a great inequality in access to vaccination across the globe, depending on the economic status of many countries. Similarly, in the same country, whether it's a developed country or a developing country, you see huge inequalities. For example, in the United States, during COVID, when many millions of people lost their jobs, statistics show that women and underrepresented minorities lost jobs and livelihoods in disproportionately larger numbers than others. So the gender inequality, race inequality have been exposed much more because of COVID. We have other types of inequalities that existed even before COVID, and in some cases, COVID has exacerbated those inequalities. For example, inequality of opportunities, inequality of access to digital tools, and many other inequalities. Even in developed countries, many universities saw this, that students Dr. Deepak Jain talked about his journey from a small village to becoming dean of the Kellogg School at Northwestern University. Likewise, many students who are first-time university, college students in their families, they had to suffer because one or more parents lost their jobs, especially those in the gig economies. And even in developed countries, students faced financial distress, and students from poorer backgrounds face disproportionately larger financial stress. And so these inequalities will continue to exist post-COVID. So one of the challenges with respect to technologies is to make sure that we address these inequalities in the most equitable way and the fair way. And this is, I'll pick this point up later. COVID has also shown us from the remarkable speed and efficacy with which the vaccine design, development, production, and dissemination happened, that science has a very important role to play in society, and universities have a very important role to play in society. Many research activities across universities supported their local communities, their local hospitals, from detection of COVID to the various diagnostic tools, potential therapeutic avenues, design of vaccines, interface with pharma and logistics, and many other ways, advising governments and policymakers and so forth. So the role of science and technology has always been known to be very critical to global society. And that point has been further reinforced very, very strongly because of COVID. Universities are known to be a major player in shaping the economic vibrancy of societies around the world. And that point has also been strongly reaffirmed during COVID. At the same time, moving to the next point, the trust in science and trust in technology and trust in policy has still been very shaky. Vaccine hesitancy is still widespread across the world. At the same time, we also have evidence-based scientific arguments don't always get traction across the world. And these are exacerbated by information or misinformation in many forums, both in print media and in social media, especially in social media, and also the tug of war between real news that's authenticated by and with veracity by peer review and fact checking versus fake news that can spread very, very quickly. So these factors have played a very important role countering the reaffirmation of the important role of science, universities, and technology. And this is something that we have to address in the post-COVID world. And this is something that academia, industry, government, and policymakers and nonprofits will have to address. And of course, the nature of work has changed. And the line between personal life and professional life has been blurred. And some would argue that it's been irreversibly altered. If so, in potentially the new hybrid world that we may live in post-COVID, what will be the new normal? And that may be different for different companies. It may be different for different societies, depending on the stage of evolution in the economic sense that these societies are in. But nevertheless, we know that many multinational companies have been able to successfully operate across continents without interruption of their workflow, while the leadership teams of these companies have stayed home and worked from home, along with hundreds of thousands of employees scattered in more than 100 countries. And this has reinforced another aspect of technology. At a time when humans cannot get together in person, technology has come to the rescue, not only with respect to human connection, but with respect to work itself and profession itself and global commerce itself, despite all the disruptions that COVID caused. So these mega trends arising from COVID give us a lot to think about with respect to policies, practices, and the way we will live, and the role of universities, governments, and industry. Next slide, please. So that brings me to technology and the fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution, which we were already in prior to the onset of COVID, is broadly viewed as the unique convergence of the physical world, the digital world, and the biological world. These have combined to create interplays in the development of technology, acceleration in the rollout of technology, and even further acceleration in the adoption of technology that not only affects industries, it affects individual citizens and our day-to-day lives at unprecedented speed, at unprecedented scope, and its impact will be felt like never before. And I'm going to discuss a little bit more of this. But the fourth industrial revolution has some key ingredients and intellectual disciplines and features that power this. Robotics, artificial intelligence, data science, blockchain, Internet of Things, autonomous systems, both ground-based systems as well as air-based systems or any other autonomous system, personalized medicine, smart healthcare, individualized and precision medicine, and many others will drive this Industry 4.0. With the onset of 5G, which has already started to happen in stages, this is going to be even more accelerated across the globe because of our ability to transmit large amounts of data through 5G systems. It also brings to us new and unique challenges and questions that perhaps the three previous industrial revolutions have not brought to us. For example, new questions about ethics, about governance, about policy, the ability of governments and policy makers to keep up with respect to regulations, keep up with technology. Technology is moving very fast. Are governments and policymakers able to move equally fast? If not, what will be the consequence of this? And yet another unknown is humans are always known to use technology to the fullest extent. They are very adept at it. We know that from the three previous industrial revolutions. But we also know that there are potentially intended and unintended uses, misuses, and abuses of technology. So how do we make sure that humans are incentivized to use technology the right way and humanity benefits from the advances in technology and does not suffer? If so, what are the consequences and what are the issues with respect to interface of technology with humanity? This is something that we have to think through very carefully as well. So let me go to the next slide and talk about some of the disruptive technologies. This is taken from a slide from McKinsey a couple of years ago, and they highlight 12 disruptive technologies, and these are not the only 12, but these are supposed to have the most financial impact and global impact. Mobile internet is one of them. 5G technologies is a very good example of something that will propel that mobile internet. Cloud technologies, we already know, play a very important role. Advanced materials, we have nanotechnologies, 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer technologies in the semiconductor industry, for example. Atomic resolution, subatomic resolution microscopes play an important role. Next generation genomics, things like CRISPR-Cas, where you can do gene editing, have advanced quite a bit, and their implications for treating human diseases are quite profound. Advanced robotics, from surgery to industry to washing of windows in tall buildings, and many other applications in seaports, airports, etc. Also autonomous systems, they play an important role. Automation of knowledge work, from things like tax preparation, legal work, to radiologists reading mammograms and things like this. There is a lot of potential for automated work, which can replace in some areas traditional human work. Energy storage is another area. Advanced oil and gas exploration recovery using these tools and technologies. Autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, digital printing, digital manufacturing, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, as well as renewable energies of different kinds. So these are disruptive technologies with trillions of dollars in economic consequences over the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the interface of technology with humanity and its implications for education. So if in Industry 4.0, machine intelligence and artificial intelligence are going to become more and more pervasive, stronger and stronger, and they will make more and more routine decisions of major consequence in every aspect of human endeavor, then what are the implications for native, innate human characteristics? And what are the positives and what are the potential downsides? And nobody really knows the answer to this. So I'm going to take a couple of slides to walk through this. So let's take at something that's uniquely human traits that define each one of the 7 billion of us on the planet uniquely as an individual. That makes me different from you. It makes my personality different from my own sibling's personality. It makes me different from my neighbor, coming from the same town, from the same race, with very similar background, because these characteristics are defined and shaped uniquely by my DNA, my family experience, my life experiences, the way I was brought up, my life journey, my work experiences, and that's uniquely me. And that defines each one of us as human beings. So there are many, many such characteristics, not all of which we can quantify or define precisely. Here are some of these characteristics: compassion, dignity, empathy, ethics, kindness, trust, and respect. Let's take dignity as an example. If you take India as a very large and very diverse country, people living in the same large city like Mumbai, their personal sense of dignity may be different, even though they come from very similar backgrounds, because of their family circumstances, the values that were instilled in them from a very young age in their own immediate surroundings. Then you go broader. You look at somebody from one part of India and compare them to a different part of India, where they have different local histories, etc., different languages, different local cultures, even though they may still speak Hindi as a language. Their personal sense of individual dignity may vary, where collectively a national sense of dignity may be somewhat similar, but individual definition of dignity may vary. Then you broaden the scope even further. You take an Indian living in India versus an Indian living in Singapore, or an Indian living in North America versus an Indian living in the Middle East. Their life experiences and local circumstances are very different. So we can readily see that any of these characteristics that are listed here, one sense of a personal space and personal human characteristics can differ drastically because of the specific path they took throughout their life that shaped them, that shape their thinking, that shape their values. And will machines and artificial intelligence that agglomerate vast amounts of data across regions, across cultures, across races, and come up with solutions in massive algorithms, will they be able to distinguish individually the differences in characteristics that define you as you, that define me as me? And if so, if machine intelligence and artificial intelligence makes major decisions, but becomes incapable of separating my individual values from your individual values, how detrimental can that be, both for you and for me in the future? That is a very important question to ask with respect to Humanity 4.0, with respect to artificial intelligence or Industry 4.0. Next slide, please. So this brings me to 6 issues that I would like to pose, 6 questions or issues that I think we should address I've thought about this for quite some time, and I think, at least in my own mind, these 6 issues capture some of my uh, positive feelings about technology as a technologist, but also some of my concerns about using technology the right way for the benefit of humanity. Let's start with the first one. So job creation versus job destruction. I already talked about worsening inequality within the same country or across countries in the world. We know from 3 previous industrial revolutions that every previous industrial revolution eliminated tens of millions of jobs. But eventually, when it settled down, it ended up creating many more millions of jobs than it destroyed. But it, in some cases, took several decades. Given the worsening inequality, which has been exacerbated by COVID, we don't have the luxury of waiting several decades for job creation to catch up with job elimination across the world. If so, what are the political consequences of this? How do we make sure that the balance between changing one type of jobs for another type of jobs as we go from industry 3.0 to 4.0 in the post-COVID world is adequately balanced by policymakers, by industry people, and by educators around the world? How do we prepare the population for this? This is going to be one of the key issues. The next issue is what constitutes an educated person. So Jio Institute is in a very unique position. It is a new university or institute that is being started from scratch. And it's being designed in such a way that it can address the current needs of global society and Indian society as well. And it can adjust its curriculum in such a way that it's contemporary while making use of wealth of knowledge from many, many centuries and millennia. But one of the questions facing all universities today, including Jio, is as we create a curriculum, as we refine our curriculum, when a student graduates from a university after 3 years or 4 years, what is the minimum body of knowledge that they are supposed to possess? What constitutes an educated person? Because we don't have an infinite amount of time to continue to educate a person, but we want to prepare a young person with a university degree so that they not only continue to learn throughout their lives for lifelong learning, but they also use the degree and the education that they obtain at the institute or the university to enable them to relearn continuously so that they can not only change jobs, they can even change professions in a very long and productive life for many, many decades to follow. So this is a very important question. And I'll come to some examples of issues that universities need to address here. The next issue is definition of being human. So the previous slide, I talked about different uniquely human characteristics that machines today cannot comprehend, absorb, imitate, or emulate. So given that we are uniquely human, will machines and artificial intelligence and data science and massive amount of data aggregation, even properly authenticated and validated, will it run the risk of even in subtle ways altering human characteristics? And I'm going to give one particular examples of this in my issue number 6 later. But this question is an important question. It's also addressed by the subsequent issues that I'm going to address. So this is something we have to keep in mind as we implement and use technology 4.0. Yuval Harari, in his book, 21 Questions for the 21st Century, talked about some of these issues in his book in a very eloquent way as well. Next issue, please. So many people argue that sometime in the future, nobody knows exactly when, maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we may reach a so-called point of singularity where machine intelligence and machine decisions will become almost as good as human intelligence and human decisions. Some people think we may never reach that point, but others argue it may come by 2040 or 2050 or something like this. But irrespectively of whether it happens or not 100%, it's very likely that artificial intelligence and machine learning and data science will lead to ever increasing set of machine decisions in our day-to-day lives, both seemingly simple decisions and very profound decisions, from driving a car to flying an aircraft to many other decisions and related ethical questions, etc. So one of the questions then is, will machine decisions be reversible by humans? Can they be reversible in time before we have any catastrophic consequences? If so, how do we make it happen? What kind of checks and balances do we want to put in? And who is in charge? And how do we make those decisions based on whose values? Will machines worsen and exacerbate human bias? And we know that humans have intrinsic biases, both conscious and unconscious, which can vary from society to society, from generation to generation, etc. Will machines make it worse? Can machines make it better and reduce human bias? These are interesting questions. It's an opportunity to address, to reflect on our status quo and address some of the existing problems. It is also a challenge to address as we deploy new technologies. Next issue, please. Every technology from previous industrial revolution led to intended benefits, but it also led to unintended consequences. So with Industry 4.0, how do we maximize the benefits and minimize the consequences? How do we anticipate consequences? For example, in Industry 3.0, many scholars argue that some of the best accomplishments, greatest engineering achievements of the 20th century, like electrification, the internal combustion engine automobile, for example, factories that we produced, carbon-based systems, etc., nuclear power, creation of the internet, produced remarkable benefits to humankind. But we also have in the 21st century some of the unintended consequences: climate change, pollution of the environment, cyber threat, nuclear wars, carbon sequestration issues, and many others, congestion of population, congestion of roads, etc. So how do we maximize the benefits and minimize the consequences? What was missing in Industry 4.0 that we need to address? From an educational point of view, some people argue that in the past, perhaps we focused on technology, but we did not focus enough on human behavior. So maybe now we can fix it, or at least try to address it. So we take technology with human behavior side by side. So technology and humanity side by side. So when we teach technology and computer science and artificial intelligence, we also teach human behavior, social sciences, psychology, etc. So by bringing the two together, we create a system that has a much more balance than perhaps the previous industrial revolutions had. And the last issue that I want to address is a very subtle point, but a very important point. Technology is now pushing us to be more and more precise, more and more perfect, and more immediate, to be less and less patient. We know that atomic clocks can precisely tell the time. The GPS, even in our Apple Watch, can precisely pinpoint a location. We have precision medicine that can precisely target. Gene editing and CRISPR-Cas9, for example, provide us tools for gene editing for different diseases. So precision, perfection, when somebody sends you an email, they expect a response, or text message, they expect a response immediately. We get instant gratification from social media and responding and liking things immediately. So at a time when technology pushes us to be more and more precise, more and more immediate, and more perfect, human nature is intrinsically imprecise, imperfect, and needs the time and the space for rest, relaxation, and reflection. We fall down, We get up, we learn. That's how we learn how to ride a bike. And we learn from mistakes. Great entrepreneurs fail, and then they learn from their mistakes and create big successes. So if technology is pushing us in a direction that's intrinsically not aligned with basic human characteristics of learning from mistakes, and also rest, relaxation, and reflection fosters creativity and learning, human creativity. Good writing takes time for reflection. How do we balance the speed with which we are moving and the pace of adoption of technology with the time we need to reflect, to be very creative? And this is going to be a very important factor to find the right balance, especially with the pace of adoption of technology that I showed in my very first slide. So with this, I would like to look at a few more slides and issues and some possible angles of what we can do as universities, as industry, as government, and try to look at some possible solutions, and then we can have a discussion. So at NTU, we debated this issue a couple of years ago, soon after I joined the university. My colleagues and I thought it'll be very important. We are not the first university to do this. We thought at a time of Industry 4.0, it is very important for us to balance science and technology on the one hand with humanity on the other hand. So we created something called NIST, the NTU Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity. And of course, it's a very broad topic, very deep topic. So we decided to focus on 3 issues, at least for the immediate future: responsible innovation, governance and leadership in the era of Industry 4.0, and being an institution in Asia, we thought we'll focus on new urban Asia, where we look at growing, aging population, growing cities, migration to cities, congestion, pollution, inequality, poverty, etc., etc. So this is a focus, this is a group. So this institute fosters conversations, dialogues, bringing together policymakers, academics, researchers, and industrialists together to foster a conversation so that we can move forward with contributions to society. And this is a very important area, I think, for many universities to address. So this is one example of what an academic institution can potentially do. There are a few other academic institutions across the world that have taken similar approaches to this. Next slide, please. The role of universities. There are other things that the universities can do. So learning 4.0. So I would like to list 6 topics here on what universities can do. It's by no means comprehensive, but at least these 6 capture many of the issues that I highlighted before. And it's not just the universities, it's also in partnership with governments and industry. So I'm going to start at the top right and go clockwise. So at NTU, 3 years ago, we have about 24,000 undergraduate students in 4 years. We decided that we will introduce a module on digital literacy that will be required of all our undergraduate students for them to get an undergraduate degree from NTU in Singapore. Digital literacy involves, for example, if somebody is majoring in computer science, we expect them to know something about social sciences, economics, humanities, literature, etc. Likewise, somebody who may major in humanities or literature, we expect them to know something about coding, something about digital literacy, digital responsibility and hygiene, privacy, confidentiality, intellectual property in the digital age, social responsibility, especially in social media, commitment to sustainability and things like this. We also rolled out in 2018 a new undergraduate degree program in data science and artificial intelligence. Last year, Forbes magazine rated this undergraduate degree program at NTU as one of the top 10 in the world in the area of data science and AI. So these are examples of some initiatives that we have put together for all our undergraduate students. Last month, we introduced a new interdisciplinary collaborative core curriculum for all the undergraduate students who will join us this year and moving forward. So here, an engineering, science, or medical student will also be increasingly more exposed to social sciences, humanities, etc., in new and unique ways. We also introduce more internship opportunities with the industry for all of our undergraduate students, in addition to international exposure. Going to the next topic, lifelong learning is a very important part of continuous learning and upgrading of skills for citizens all over the world. The Singapore government has made it a priority for all its citizens. So NTU has about 250,000 living alumni across the world. And we have given each one of our living alumni 1,600 Singapore dollars in credit so that they can take classes from NTU for free. On top of it, the government provides support to citizens who can take classes from us online from wherever they are. And we have also introduced a mini master's program and also specific modules and curricula for industry participants. So this is another effort not only to serve our own students and our own alumni after they graduate, but also to serve citizens, not just within Singapore, but around the world, and also our industry collaborators. Then going to the next one, training to manage information and misinformation. Part of our curriculum in digital literacy also focuses on teaching students at a young age to identify authenticated real news from misinformation, especially across media, and to enable them to make informed decisions, especially in the digital age. And think this is going to be even more important moving forward. Responsible innovation, innovation that not only focuses on maximizing profit, but also focuses on protecting the environment, serving citizens, ensuring the health of the society, and so forth, is going to be very critical. And different countries in different stages of evolution have different infrastructure and different resources available to do this. But at the same time, moving forward, how to make it happen? Can university play a role in helping local communities and societies to leapfrog technology so that they can jump technology so that they don't have to be bound by the negative consequences of previous technologies, but adopt new technologies? Universities in partnership with industry and government have a very important role to play. Role of social sciences, ethics, and humanities is going to be very important here. Ethics in the digital age is particularly tricky because I think it has to be governed by commonly accepted sense of values when data is gathered from across the globe. And I think this is where entities like the Institute for Science and Technology for Humanity have to come in. The role of ethics, the role of philosophy, cultural nuances, all of these have to be taken into account. And universities also have a role, and we have embarked on this journey as well, a critical assessment of core skills on what constitutes an educated person of the 21st century. What minimum body of knowledge in coding, in computer science, in social sciences, in economics, in societal issues, in sustainability, etc., one needs to learn in 4 years so that they can use that lifelong. And how do we prepare our students to think critically, not to solve a particular problem, but to be prepared to solve problems lifelong, especially grand global challenges in partnership with the global society. So next slide, please. This is my last slide, and I will conclude with this. So take sustainability as an example. I want to highlight we as just one university among many, many great universities in the world have chosen to do. We are very fortunate to be a young university, which as NTU was founded only 30 years ago. And it's now widely viewed by many metrics as one of the top global research universities based in Singapore with an Asian focus. And So our commitment to sustainability takes many different angles. In the new curriculum that I mentioned that we just rolled out, sustainability education will play an important role. We have 4 major research centers on campus, one dealing with alternative sources of energy, one dealing with water and waste generation, one dealing with microbiomes and the environment, and one dealing with hurricanes, tsunamis, weather patterns, and rising sea levels, and global climate change, etc. All of these research centers create new knowledge. They publish top scientific papers. They also engage citizens within the country. They address some existential challenges, from hurricanes and tsunamis in the case of the Earth Observatory of Singapore, based at NTU, to ERIAN, which is our Energy Research Institute, to NURIA, which is our Water Research Institute, etc. So these are all areas that we focus on. So in education, in research. In addition to that, we have a very large campus, very beautiful campus. We have more than 235 buildings on our campus, some very iconic buildings. And 97% of our entire campus building infrastructure is already marked, green marked platinum certified. If you look at this picture on rooftops, you'll see a lot of solar panels. We've decided that in the next 5 years, in our next 5-year strategic plan, which we call NTU 2025, we will essentially make the entire campus a green mark platinum campus. There are very few university campuses in the world that can claim to be a platinum campus. It's like LEED platinum in northern climates. Green mark platinum is for tropical climates like Singapore. We also made a bold stretch goal for ourselves as a campus in the next 5 years. By the end of our 5-year strategic plan at the end of 2025, we aspire as a stretch goal to reduce our net energy consumption or utilization for the entire campus, where 40,000 people live and work on any given day, net water use and net waste generation, each one of these 3 by 50% by the end of 2025 compared to the baseline levels of 2011. We are about 30% of the way through already. And our stretch goal is to reach that goal. If we achieve that objective by 2025, our next big target will be net zero. And this is also aligned with Singapore's Green Plan 2030, where the aspiration is for net zero. And so these are ways in which the university will make a commitment as a living testbed for sustainability, as one example, one small example of one university taking a step in this opportunity or challenge with respect to technology 4.0 and humanity 4.0. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll be very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Sanchayan, for moderating this session.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very wonderful session, a lot to learn from and a lot to ponder upon, a lot to discuss as well. So on that note, I'll probably start with a few questions that we have received from the audience. So there is one question which you mentioned, how jobs may change. The job roles also may change because of what's happening in the world today. So there is one question which asks, could you please elaborate your views on the types of jobs that are expected to be created when IR 4.0 gets settled?
I think, given the pace of technology and given the speed at which it's moving, it is very difficult to forecast specifically how jobs will change. But in general, I think with the advances in robotics, autonomous systems, digital twins, etc., many of the routine jobs that required human engagement, very repetitive work, and human engagement and human toil, just as we have seen in the 3 previous industrial revolution with automation and industrial revolution, and also assembly lines in the second and third industrial revolution, we will have similar changes in routine jobs. And with artificial intelligence, even jobs such as, and this is not my idea, this is many people have talked about it and written about it, even jobs like preparing routine tax matters, for example, routine legal work, routine reading of radiographs in medicine, x-rays and things like this, where machine vision can be much more accurate than computer vision can be much more accurate than human eyes can be sometimes. And you can combine that with data analytics, even though for very sophisticated and very specialized cases, we may need human intervention and training and sophistication. Many routine jobs could be done perhaps even better than humans by machines. So these are examples of jobs where AI could play an important role.
Okay, so sir, in the next question is related. So in a world where, as you said, jobs may be taken over by AI, the menial ones, does that then give opportunities for entrepreneurship? So in line with the next question, what's your perspective on entrepreneurship education becoming one of the core skills for being an educated person in the future?
I think increasingly the generation of students today are intrinsically have, first of all, they have many more opportunities for entrepreneurship. And the younger generation today have grown up in a globalized world, say, compared to my generation or Dr. Jain's generation when we studied in India. For example, I got my first degree at IIT Madras. And at that time, I don't remember in my 5 years of undergraduate degree, the word entrepreneurship was mentioned once. The word innovation was not mentioned once. But at the same time, if I look at my classmates, what they have done, since they graduated from IIT, many have been extremely entrepreneurial in their careers, and some have retired now. You know, the humans have an intrinsic ability for entrepreneurship. When they are given the opportunity to do so, they rise to the occasion. And you know, many countries are very good at it, and India is one of those countries where there is a lot of entrepreneurship at all scales, at the individual scale and at the national level as well. So the universities have a very important role to play. So at NTU, for example, I can give specific examples. We have a separate wholly owned subsidiary of NTU called Intuitive, like intuitive, it's called Intuitive. And Intuitive is our technology licensing arm, and that takes IP from NTU, from students and faculty, and that helps them to commercialize it, to spin out. Last year, for example, just a few months ago, we had our first unicorn that was born out of NTU IP. It was listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange, a company called Nanofilm Technologies by a former NTU professor who was the co-founder and now the CEO of the company. So these are examples in which universities can play a very important role. I know that my own alma mater, IIT Madras, has an incubator, and they have a lot of activities in entrepreneurship. And I visited the campus a couple of years ago. I was very pleased to see how many students were interested in entrepreneurship compared to my generation. And Jio Institute, as a new university, has a fantastic opportunity to foster those kinds of interactions as well.
So just in conjunction to that, how important do you think is to build ecosystems where failure can be celebrated as well? Because that's important for entrepreneurial ventures as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one part of, so we have a minor in entrepreneurship with several different majors. And one of the lessons that's taught is not just for students, but also for faculty, you know, being more forgiving, and administrators be more forgiving of failure and learn from failure. This is one of the points I made earlier. Humans, you know, we fall down, we pick up, we get up, and we run again. And same thing should apply to entrepreneurship as well. And failure should not be a permanent fatal flaw. And failure should be, you know, a learning opportunity and lesson. And if it can be taught and nurtured in entrepreneurship courses, I think it's really wonderful to have this.
So, sir, we have a lot of the audience from India, of course. So, a couple of India-centric questions. So, given our economy and the nature of our economy, which is formal as well as informal, there's a question which asks how India should manage labor-intensive businesses in Industry 4.0, which highlights more technology and capital-intensive mechanisms.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, and I will not claim to be an expert on India I do know, having grown up in India, I do know quite a bit about India, but there are others in India who are more qualified to answer that question than I am. But if I could venture some personal thoughts, I would view this. I mean, that's why I said earlier that different countries in different stages of evolution. Some countries adopt policy. For example, if you compare two countries with similar population, China and India, they have very different political system, they have very different social system, and they have responded differently to technological challenges and opportunities over the last 30 years, 40 years. Of course, China started its path in modernization to the new mode in 1979, whereas India started in 1991. So there is a time lag in that as well. There are different approaches to this, and I think there is a lot of talent in India. I would view this as a opportunity challenge dilemma, because of course, removal of human labor abruptly and immediately for a large country like India, where there is a lot of people available to looking for work, could be done too rapidly, could end up being negative. But at the same time, if we can explore ways in which digital tools can increase productivity, but also give opportunity to others to enter the workforce in ways in which they have not entered. And also digital tools, there are a lot of positives to technology. I mean, Jio, the company, is a very good example of disseminating 4G technology across hundreds of millions of people across India. So, for example, if digital tools could be made available to a large cross-section of the Indian population, especially in rural villages, they can also be used in conjunction with education. So digital education supplemented with some local in-person education, which provides opportunities for society that previously did not have an opportunity to attend university or attend even finish high school and so forth. Then over a period of time, carefully implemented, you can balance loss of jobs due to automation with gain of jobs and gain of new opportunities for large numbers of people with new tools and technologies. I think this is the time lag I was referring to. As long as the time lag is properly managed, there are benefits to technology and there are benefits to training people. And the good thing about India is there is an availability of a large pool of talent. How that talent pool can be adequately trained is the challenge. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it is something that that can be addressed with the proper policies and practices.
So you mentioned digital tools. So I think something that's very important with digital tools is also digital literacy. I mean, recently, yesterday, I think we celebrated International Literacy Day, where the theme this year was bridging the digital divide, especially post the pandemic. So what role do you think universities in India can play in this juncture?
I think, digital literacy, I mentioned we started with all of our undergraduate students. So this is at any given time, we have 23,000 undergraduate students. So if many universities adopt it in a large country like India, where we have large numbers of private universities, public universities, etc., and even this doesn't have to wait at the university level. This can start much earlier. It can start at the K through 12 level. And the younger people, fortunately, are much more digitally savvy than the older generation. And I think the challenge is not going to be the young student. The challenge is going to be training the teachers to be digitally adept as well. And I think that's going to be an interesting challenge also. If it starts earlier, then I think it can become part and parcel of the educational enterprise.
So, sir, there is another question which is a little more detailed. So, it mentions Yuval Noah Harari, basically. So, the writer of Homo Deus and, of course, Sapiens. So,
Yeah.
the question says Yuval Noah Harari has painted a much gloomier picture of the future due to advances in AI and computing. He claims that even emotions and values can be replicated by computers, and humans will become irrelevant and quite inefficient in ingredients, except very few superhumans. You seem to have a more optimistic perspective. Why is that?
No, I did not take a stand on whether the outcome is going to be totally optimistic or pessimistic. I just presented the pros and cons. And for example, the 6 issues I presented, I've read all of Yuval Harari's books that were referred to, and 21 challenges for the 21st century and many others. And I think he makes very valid points. He also talks about the potential benefits of technology. Of course, he points quite vividly the negative consequences of technology, which I also highlighted here. I want to make sure, I mean, to me, it's a question of whether is the glass half full or half empty. And in fact, I will give one example. If we look at the achievements of the 20th century and the challenges of the 21st century, this is what the US National Academy of Engineering did at the turn of this century. And they pointed out that some people pointed out that some of the challenges of the 21st century may have been a direct consequence of some of the greatest achievements of the 20th century, which is what I was referring to earlier, things like automobile, nuclear power, creation of the internet, etc., are great achievements that have connected people together. So every industrial revolution has shown positives and negatives of technology. And we have negatives of technology in the 4th industrial revolution. So if you go back to the 1st industrial revolution to now, there have always been negative consequences of technology. So the question is, are we as a human race are going to recognize the negative consequences? Are we going to address them in time? And are we going to put in place measures that will prevent us from making the same mistakes over and over again? And the jury is still out on this.
I think historically, sorry, sir, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that. So I don't know. I don't think anybody knows for sure whether the outcome is going to be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic. The potential for both is there. And I think it depends on how we are going to navigate through this.
Right. So I think historically we've seen mostly the industrial revolution has thrown in more advantages than disadvantages. So hopefully the trend continues. So
but I think one point I would make related to the question is Yuval Harari paints an interesting picture of this, which I also in my 6 issues I try to capture. One thing that's different in the 4th industrial revolution from the 3 previous industrial revolutions is that the extent to which human characteristics itself, because of AI and machine learning, could be affected is not fully clear. And I think until we wrap our arms around that particular issue, we need to be quite circumspect about positive aspects of technology until we absolutely make sure that the benefits outweigh the detrimental consequences.
Right. So for the 4th industrial revolution, the backbone for this revolution will, of course, be corporates in a capitalist-driven economy worldwide. So the next question is about corporate management. So mostly corporate management has been about competition and bottom lines. Only when we reach decision-making levels is there a concern around public policy and ethics, which is also blurred as of now. So therefore, how do we train our upcoming managers, consultants, students to shift focus from only product market fit to product ethics, public policy alignments?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And I serve on the boards of a few companies, both public and private, and there's some multinational companies. And one of the things I've noticed, those I consult for and those I serve on the boards of, there is an increasing realization, and which has been reaffirmed by COVID, is that some of the things where we could kick the can down the road to future generations I think there is less and less opportunity to do so, and passing on the responsibility to future generations. Environmental sustainability is a very good example of this. So what is the responsibility of corporations? And you will see, so that's one. And the second is the social inequality and diversity in general, but that has been a topic for a long period of time, and it means different things in different parts of the world. But that's another area where, if at least in the last 12 months, the emphasis on those, partly driven by the marketplace, has the drumbeat of questions and the need to focus on it has intensified in the last 18 months. So the jury is still out on whether that is going to sustain once impact of COVID dies down. But we recently heard the report from on sustainability that even the current pace of our response to climate change, for example, may not be fast enough. Looking at the number of unpredictable weather events, severe weather events, from wildfires to flooding and hurricanes and tsunamis, etc., it's not fast enough. So I think there is going to be increasing pressure on businesses and corporations to focus on this, rather than, I think you already see that from just the number of commitments that corporations have made with respect to sustainability. And it remains to be seen how they will deliver. It also, there is an opportunity for shareholders of these companies to hold the management accountable, because the shareholders still have a say in all of this. So I think it's maybe coming out of COVID, some of these issues will be there'll be a new spotlight on these issues.
Right, so we have time for one last question. So you briefly mentioned climate change now. So when it comes to these kinds of issues, which are new day and age issues, there has been a lot of resistance to even acknowledging the impact such issues may have for future generations. So what role do you think communication has to play, more specifically science communication has to play, when it comes to making these issues more relevant socially, politically, and like in different geographies?
I think science communication is very, very important. And unfortunately, one of the points I made earlier is, despite the impact of science in addressing very, very quickly and effectively, but through development of vaccines, trust in science is not where it needs to be. And more broadly, evidence-based policy making and follow-up and regulations, etc., even in some developed countries, is not fully practiced. And I think this is an issue, and it's not all on the leaders. It's not all on the policymakers. It's equally on the scientists. We as scientists have to communicate both the positives and the negatives of science. And science is never 100% certain. Otherwise, we won't make progress, because science also moves sometimes incrementally, and there is always uncertainty surrounding science. I think truthfully and effectively, we have to articulate this. There is an effort. In fact, I'm co-chairing for the World Economic Forum something called the Global Future Council on Scientific Collaboration, along with Dr. Fabiola Gianetti, who's the Director General of CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. So she and I, along with about a dozen or so council members, have been discussing this particular topic. And several things have come related directly to your question. One is how to focus on science, especially with areas like climate change, vaccine efficacy, vaccine hesitancy, and so forth, and how do scientists work with policymakers, regulators, government agencies, etc., and nonprofits, to disseminate that information much more effectively than we have done. It is not an easy thing to do. In fact, on the climate change issue, when I was director of the US National Science Foundation, I went to the South Pole because NSF is in charge of running stations in Antarctica. So I stood at the geographic South Pole, and the pilots who took me there on an Air Force plane They told me they've been flying these routes and they see this ice receding with every succeeding year. I also flew with them to the highest point of the Arctic Circle in Greenland in a place called Summit. And one of the pilots showed me a glacier called the Jakobshavn Glacier in northwestern Greenland, which has shrunk over the last 20 years significantly because of warming. And so these people who have seen this, these are citizens. I mean, these are pilots who have flown this route for decades. So I think science communication is going to be so critical in a technological age, in a digital age, and we still have some distance to go. The good thing is agencies like the National Science Foundation know the importance of this, and there are efforts in Washington, both from nonprofits and from government agencies, to try to address this. So hopefully we'll make progress compared to where we are today, and it's a very important issue.
Thank you, sir, for that. I believe your presentation and then your answers to the questions is a very good example of science communication, something that we have to make more widespread across the general public as well. So with that, we come to the end of the session. I'd like to request Prerna Gupta, who is part of the leadership team at Jio Institute, to please deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh, for an amazing address. So webinars and events like these, it is our commitment and endeavor at Jio Institute to bring global leaders like Dr. Suresh to foster discussion on issues of importance, not just in higher education, but issues that impact our life significantly. On behalf of the entire team of Jio Institute, it gives me immense pleasure to extend a heartfelt thanks to the President, Dr. Subra Suresh, once again, for an engaging and enriching session. So it's been a privilege always. Your overarching views on technology, its implication on economics and society, and the simplicity with which you presented complex thoughts and ideas is always an inspiration. We look forward to more use of sustainable energy for a better world. With this, I would also like to take this opportunity to express profound gratitude to our visionary founders, Mrs. Neeta Ambani and Mr. Mukesh Ambani, for their inspirational leadership. Mr. Ambani, incidentally, very recently at the International Climate Summit, spoke about the focus on sustainable energy and his commitment to make it more affordable, much in line with our mantra at Jio Institute of Affordable Excellence as well. I would like to take this opportunity again to thank the Jio Institute leadership, Dr. Mashelkar and Dr. Deepak Jain, for their deep commitment always, and to always support and guide us wholeheartedly for creating this multidisciplinary research institute for India. We have been extremely delighted to host participants from around the world. Thank you for joining us today. Your questions, your thoughts, and sometimes even your ideas are very inspiring. It keeps the interaction going, so please do keep them coming, and do share your feedback with us after this session. We have a series of exciting events lined up. Like always, we have a library workshop on digital libraries next week. We also will be hosting symposiums in the area of AI and digital media very soon. You will get to know more on emails, etc. And with that, I would request you all to do share the thoughts on this session too. And we would like you. I would like to conclude this session by wishing you all a very pleasant evening and happy Ganesh Chaturthi to all those joining us from Mumbai, Maharashtra. An exciting and very holy week coming up. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all from Jio Institute. Namaste.